Very good. Thank you, Bree, and I'm very happy to be here. And thank you to everyone for attending. I hope this is a useful session for you, and we look forward to your questions. Next slide, please. This is what we're going to do today. No reason to spend too much time on this, but we're going to tell you what the report is, kind of its key findings, and what we think it means for the future and what's coming next. Next question. Next slide, please. So here's the situation that prompted all of this in the first place as we see it. Clearly, there's been a lot of TNR done over the last several decades, a lot more in some places than others. And to be very clear, all of us recognize that for all of the cats who have gone through a TNR program, their lives have been made better, quite possibly longer, and many, many kittens have been prevented, kittens that would have likely died early. So the TNR work that's been done to date has undeniably done a lot of good and created a lot of humane benefit. All that said, more and more people are starting to wonder if it has really changed the baseline situation. We still have a lot of free roaming cats living out there in the world. Have we really made a dent in that problem? Or are we just helping the cats that we can, but without creating that kind of systemic change that we would all like to see occur? And this question is really what prompted the Summerlee Foundation to engage Stacy and I in an exercise to evaluate it in more detail and think about what we could do to create more systemic change. Next slide, please. There's a good reason why a lot of TNR effort might not easily translate into the level of population level change or systemic change that we would hope to see. And I'm going to go through this little kind of example of the bathtub to try to explain why that is. And a few of you may have seen me use this example before in previous talks. If so, I apologize for repeating myself, but I think it can be helpful. So if we imagine that a population of free roaming cats in some large area is the water in a bathtub, the current level of that water in the bathtub is our population size. And in many places, that population has reached a size where resource limitations prevent it from growing much further. In other words, lack of space, lack of food, lack of behavioral kind of opportunities. And we call that in biology the carrying capacity. And in the case of a bathtub, that upper level is enforced, if you will, by the overflow valve that we see over to the right side of that bathtub. Any water beyond that upper level automatically drains out, and biological populations have these mechanisms as well. Now, as far as the other inputs and outputs into the bathtub, we have the tap, of course, and we can think of that water coming into the tub as the sum total of reproduction of new cats, immigration of cats from outside areas, or abandonment of owned cats into the population. At the same time, water is draining out of the bottom of the bathtub through death and removal or other kinds of management. So in a typical situation, the tap, the inputs, are running faster than the drain. So more cats are being born or moving in than are being removed after living a long life. And the excess cats are going out of the overflow valve either through premature death, especially as kittens, or by immigrating away and looking for opportunities somewhere else. So what does this mean if we're trying to reduce the level of water in that bathtub below the carrying capacity down to the red line that we call the management goal? Well, logically, what it means is that that will not start to happen until the rate of water dripping into the tub drops below the level of the drain at the bottom. And at that point, the water level in the bathtub will start to decline. The trick is that because the tap is running faster than the drain, a lot of that initial reduction in tap flow doesn't get us below the break-even point. It takes a while to get below the break-even point, and typically it requires us to have 60, 70, 80% of the animals sterilized for an extended period of time. So that was a little bit of time spent on that, but that's to try to make the point that reducing community cat populations at scale is not a simple exercise. Next slide, please. So again, that's the thinking that went into this report. In the report, we tried to assess the status quo. We won't talk about that as much today, but what we'll talk about in particular is some strategies, especially for funders, but also relevant to everyone else involved in this enterprise, that can optimize and maximize the extent to which we can create systemic population level changes with whatever resources we have at hand. Next slide. Really, these recommendations boil down to these things that we call the 4 pillars of impact-focused free-roaming cat management. I would emphasize that every single one of these are topics and strategies and concepts that have been introduced at previous times and that have been talked about by community cat managers and strategists and funders in some cases for decades now. Stacy and I did not just invent these or pull them out of thin air. These are well understood strategies. What's novel in this report is that we're making the case that to give us the highest chance for real impact, we need to combine those things and really focus on performing each of these pillars up to some basic levels and allow that to operate over time. So I will spend the remainder of my time in this talk going through each of these with a little bit of detail so that you can better understand why we think they're so important in terms of optimizing the impact of our management efforts and action. So we'll go now to integration on the next slide. Okay, integration. Before I define that, I'm going to explain what we're trying to illustrate in this slide. Over at the left, you see several things listed under the heading called fueling the flow. Reproduction of unowned cats, reproduction of owned cats that are allowed outdoors, abandonment, emigration, and to some extent uncontrolled or excess food availability. All of these things are factors that tend to create more community cats in our cities and towns and blocks and counties. All of these things are operating. In many cases, they're all operating at the same time. In other places, one of them is more important than the others. But most of the time, you guys, people who care about community cats, are trying to fight all of those foes, if you will, with this one shield called TNR. It is, for any of you who are into military strategy, it's sort of like going into battle with your infantry, but without your artillery or your tanks or your air support. It makes for a sort of an unfair fight. And that's particularly true because in most places, if not all places, our ability to perform TNR has intrinsic limits, oftentimes based on the amount of veterinary capacity that we can devote to this effort. So that's what we're trying to accomplish right now. The TNR does a lot of good, but it's fighting an awful lot of forces that tend to create more cats. Next slide. Integration means expanding the tools that we bring to bear to try to fight all of these foes beyond simply TNR. That could include any or all of these other shields that are illustrated, including emphasizing better owned cat stewardship, keeping them indoors all or at least more of the time, especially if they're not altered. Education to prevent and pet retention programs to help reduce or prevent abandonment. Adoption of more adoptable community cats where that's possible, and of course, access to more affordable spay-neuter services for people who have owned cats that are allowed outdoors. That levels the playing field if all of that's done concurrently and makes this a much fairer fight. And that's illustrated in the next slide, please, with the concept of the escalator, which is used in the report to try to emphasize this point. So it will be familiar to, I believe it was about 20% of you, and hopefully to the rest of you once you get a chance to read it. But on the left side, the status quo, we have a situation where you, as a TNR operator, are trying to climb up an escalator to your goal of fewer community cats, but it's a down escalator. You're fighting against all of these forces that we talked about earlier, which are illustrated here by the very large red arrow with your somewhat smaller green arrow. And that's difficult. It's not impossible to get to the top of that escalator, but it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. By employing a more integrated approach, you increase the size of your green arrow, you increase your energy and your speed at getting up that escalator, while at the same time reducing the downward force that you're fighting against. So that's the first pillar, integration. Let's move on to the next one. And that is targeting. I'm sure that most, if not all of you, have heard of the concept of targeting in community cat work. It's been talked about for a long time now, sometimes practiced. And what I will try to do with this little cartoon over the next few slides is to give you a more visceral feeling for why targeting is so important in terms of maximizing the impact of our efforts. And further, I'll try to make a distinction between targeting as we usually envision it, which is sort of a targeting over space, and adding in the concept of targeting in time as well. So here's the usual way, not the only way, but the usual way that TNR gets done in many communities, and I call it even and opportunistic. Even means that the amount of effort devoted to TNR within a given community, and let's call these 64 cats a community, that effort is more or less evenly divided over time. You do about this many surgeries in year 1 and about the same number in year 2 and about the same number in year 3, etc. That's what I mean by even. Opportunistic means that many of the cats that are sterilized are based on where you can get a hold of cats. If people bring them to your clinic, for instance, or if you have an energetic trapper in one area during the first year, but in a different area the next year. That's illustrated here in this slide in what I call period 1. So let's just envision this as maybe each period being a month of effort or something like that. And what we see here is that 4 cats have been sterilized in period 1, spread out in different parts of the target area. Let's go to the next slide. Over time, in period 2, the next month we do 4 more of these surgeries, and they're illustrated as you see here. And that continues for 14 more months until we've done a total of 64 surgeries, which collectively should have covered all of those 64 cats. But the problem is, by the time we're 16 months in, all of these unaltered cats have had no trouble finding a mate to reproduce with and made more cats. That's us fighting against these counter forces that I talked about. Now let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how spatial targeting can help. In this case, we're in period 1, but we're making an effort to concentrate our surgeries in a subsection of our total community. And you see that illustrated down here in the lower right. And that continues into the second period. Let's see that in the next slide, please. And now we've got 8 surgeries. We're going to continue that process until we get up to 64, doing 4 more each time period, but we're going to try to grow that spatially from this core area. Now, what's different about this than the previous example I showed? Well, what's different is that if you see that one cat that's not sterilized down at the bottom right, that cat has a tougher time now finding somebody to mate with than any of the cats in the upper left, and than any of the unaltered cats in the previous example that was not targeted. We're starting to make headway now into reducing the amount of reproduction that the still intact cats can have within our population. And so we're getting ahead of the game. We're turning down some of those counter forces earlier in the game than we could have otherwise. And the advantage of doing that early multiplies over each time point. And we'll see that even more clearly illustrated in the final set of 2 slides. Keep in mind now that with both of these examples I showed you so far, we're doing 64 total surgeries, the same amount of overall effort. And that's the same as this case here, where we not only target in space, but we try to target in time. And what does that mean? It means, I oftentimes call it front loading. That means if we're going to do 64 surgeries, to the extent possible, let's do them all in one space at the beginning, or at least most of them, rather than spreading them out over multiple time periods. The advantage of doing this now is that most of these cats are sterilized. They can't have more kittens. And most of the cats remaining who are not sterilized have more difficulty finding a mate to produce more kittens with than they would have before. And turning off that tap early, again, the advantage of that multiplies over time. And then we can concentrate our effort, next slide, please, in the ensuing time periods into filling in the gaps and kind of maintaining our progress and incrementally improving it. And to the extent possible, we can, once we gather up enough resources, we can move the main targeted effort next door to the next community or to the next neighborhood or to the next city. That's the concept of front loading. And next slide, please. In all of those cases, we did 64 surgeries, but the impact of those surgeries is far greater in the targeted and front-loaded case than it is for the standard case. And this is just a graph from some research that illustrates this advantage. All of those lines extend out over a 10-year period with the number of cats in our target population shown on the left axis. And they all involve the same amount of overall TNR effort over 10 years. But as you can see from the purple line that's at the bottom, if that effort is heavily front-loaded, we reach a much lower number of cats in our population after 10 years than we do if that effort is spread out evenly over the 10 years. So that's targeting, really a crucial element in effective population management. Next slide, please. Duration. I don't need to spend too much time on this, but if you think back to the bathtub and think to your own bathtub, it takes a while for a bathtub to drain. Even if we turn off the tap, it doesn't happen overnight. So reducing the number of free-roaming cats in a population by controlling their reproductive output takes time to manifest itself, typically at least 3 to 5 years before that effect becomes clear. The process starts obviously with more cats sterilized, fewer births, ultimately lower density, but that requires the cats that are there to die off and to not be replaced. Even beyond the 5 years, it's worth keeping in mind that an effective project needs to maintain the progress that it's accomplished. You can't just say job done after 5 years and go away. You have to check in periodically to make sure the population's not starting to grow because of immigration or whatever. So duration is an important pillar of community cat management. And it's one that is oftentimes difficult to achieve because of the episodic nature of our resources and funding. And then finally, last pillar. Next slide, please. Is what I'll call documentation. That is using selected kinds of data to both prove that we're making progress toward our goal and improving the efficiency with which that progress occurs. Oftentimes, that takes the form of using some standardized cat counting or monitoring tools. Some of you may have heard of the DC cat count. If not, you can Google it in order to track our progress and make sure we're achieving what we think we're achieving. And the use of data or documentation in a broader sense is a critical part of this little circle that's illustrated on the left, which we often call adaptive management. And in a nutshell, adaptive management means not only making a plan and working the plan, but collecting information as we do that so that we learn what's effective and what's not and can adjust what we do in a timely way. Next slide, please. The examples that I like to use are driving a car. If you get in a car and you point it down the road and close your eyes and take your hands off the wheel, you'll probably be okay for a little while. But if you want to stay on that road, especially for the long term, and remember we're talking about the need for longer term projects, you have to monitor which direction you're actually going with your eyes. Think of that as data collection. And you have to have your hands on the wheel to make the necessary adjustments to stay on that road. Think of that as adaptive management. And there is no plan, there's no way we ever have enough insight to make a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan that doesn't require some adjustments along the way in order to work out as we hope. There are just too many complexities and contingencies in the real world. Things that are really important to monitor or keep our eyes on if we're trying to reduce the community cat population are sterilization rate. Have we reached these critical threshold levels, let's call it 70% or more, that will enable that population to lose cats over time through attrition, or have we still got a ways to go? If we don't know that, we're flying blind. Kitten frequency is another thing that should start to go down as the sterilization rate goes up. And then finally, of course, we hope that the population itself will start to decline, but that happens a little ways down the road. So this monitoring is critical to make sure that we're on track and to fix any deficiencies we discover while the opportunity is still there to do so. And this is new and novel stuff for a lot of groups, but I can assure you it's not as hard as you might fear it to be. It's relatively easy to incorporate some basic monitoring, especially for these measurable outcomes, than you might fear it to be. And I would encourage you guys to go to the DC Cat Count Toolbox, which you can find online if you want more information about this. Next slide, please. So that is basically a review of the pillars of the report and our recommendations for getting more juice out of the management lemon, so to speak. And Stacy, now I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to talk about what the Summerlee Foundation and United Spay Alliance have what they're thinking and what they're coming up with in terms of how these recommendations can be incorporated into funding opportunities going forward that will help to evaluate these concepts and refine them and hopefully renew everyone's interest in community cat management as an important initiative that's worthy of their attention and investments. So thank you, everybody. I'll answer questions when we're done, but now I'm turning it over to Stacy.
John, thank you so very, very much. And I'm just so thrilled to be presenting today in partnership with John. Writing this paper was really a lot of fun. And really, it's been wonderful, and it continues to be wonderful to partner with him. And many of you know that I'm involved with the United Spay Alliance as well as the Community Cats podcast. So it's putting two of my favorite things together, TNR and access to spay neuter together for cats. And it's just absolutely wonderful. And the Summerlee Foundation, huge thank you and shout out to them also. So yes, we're turning this research, this document that we have put together, into action. And as you all know, that's what I'm all about. And so here at the United Spay Alliance, we, after the paper was published, we got a group of folks together, an advisory group, and started meeting and thinking about how we could really try and do some capacity building, some change, systematic change into the way we think about our TNR programming and our community cat management um, programs in our local communities. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Summerlee Sustainable Solutions Grant, which many of you have seen and applied for, and thank you very much. I have looked at all of the applications, so it's been a joy to read about the projects and the work that has been done and the work that you continue to do. So super appreciative of those of you who took the time to fill out that grant application. So I'm going to talk about that in detail, and then a next phase is looking at some larger scale pilot projects. So that is our next step, and I'll share a bit about our thoughts with regards to that, and then engaging in training for capacity building for all organizations. So, I do want to say that when Bree did that poll in the very beginning, many people said funding was one of their number one issues, and I can't agree with you more than that. When I was running the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society, I spent 80% of my time fundraising for the programs, for the organization. But it's not just about the dollars, but it's also about our own time, and it's about working effectively, efficiently, getting those tools in place so that we can make sure we're not wasting our own time too. So wouldn't it be great to predictably trap a cat in 20 minutes rather than taking 6 days? Just think about the amount of time that could be saved if we could help develop some technology that would make that work better for you. So I value anyone's time at the same level as I value a dollar that's donated to an organization. So, just try and keep that in mind when you're listening to the second part of the presentation today. And we don't know all things. We're still learning, and so many of the factors that John was talking about with regards to integration with the different categories. There may be more categories we want to add in there. We may find there are other categories that aren't as impactful, or it may be different for each community. So I do encourage everybody to sort of have creative thought, meaning what's my town like, or what's my target area like, or what's my service area like. So we're not being prescriptive here. We're just trying to give you some thoughts and ideas about how you can look at your own community and try and identify like how things are and the groups and organizations that you're working with there. Let me dive into the Summerlee Sustainable Solutions Grant first. Next slide. All right, so the first one is we have at the United Spay Alliance collaborated with the Summerlee Foundation to create the Sustainable Solutions Grant, and we're so really thrilled and excited about it. The reason it's a little bit different than your typical grant, which is you write your application, you send it in, you ask for money for a certain project, and you get a acceptance or a decline. In this situation, we are adding in additional capacity with the goal of creating additional capacity within the organization by having the grant recipients also attend the Community Cat Certification Program at the University of the Pacific. So that's an 8-week learning situation where you're going to be able to share with your classmates about your challenges, and we can help sort through different problems, but really getting to know your area and your organization intimately and really help with problem solving to help open up some opportunities there for you to be able to capacity build and grow your organization. You might have a situation where your board of directors is not as trained as they should be, or governance is not your thing because you're trapping cats at 2 o'clock in the morning. So some of these questions that come up, where is the space for us to be able to have those conversations and actually really further professionalize the work that we are doing to create a more humane community for our cats? And so that is where we want to care, share, and love with those that are helping the cats in the community. So we want to provide support to you also. That's a very important thing that I have in my soul, which is I try to make sure that we are able to support and help anybody for their needs at any particular time. That's what this Summerlee Sustainable Solutions Grant. So you will attend this class. Those that were accepted that applied would attend this 8-week class, and then they would develop a project based on their learnings from the class, and then they would get funding for a pilot project. But the hope and the desire is that once that pilot project is completed, there will be a vision for a way to continue the work that's being done. We've seen this happen at the Community Cats Grants program that we also serve out of the United Spay Alliance, which is a more of a fundraising training grant. And we've seen folks do a new fundraising initiative, and now they've done it 3 or 4 years in a row, without being part of a grant program. So again, trying to create opportunity for ongoing sustainability, because foundation funding is wonderful, but we can't assume it's going to be there for 10 years down the line. And as John said, the duration is really important. It's a lifelong commitment to these communities and to these cats. And they oftentimes live longer than 5 years. So how are we going to support and sustain that? We also have continue with the strategic-based impact grants. All right, I'm going to scoot over to the larger pilot project. Next slide. So the larger pilot project is going to be a multi-year commitment. It's going to be for a much larger community. We're going to have multiple organizations involved, collaborating together. And again, it's really important that we do find ways to work together. We'll have in-depth data collection and impact reports. And we're still trying to work out those details as to what that looks like, so it won't be super burdensome, but we do need to have proof of concept. And we want to try and create a data collection language that works for us, and it may not be the language that we currently have at our animal shelters. So we need to create our own community cat management tracking methodology, which the DC cat count has certainly given us a big jump on that. And technology is going to help us tremendously with regards to that. And then, we want to be able to create some guideposts that'll be able to be replicated in other communities. And so we have some thoughts with that. And we're very much in our earlier stages on this larger pilot project than where we are with the Sustainable Solutions Grant. Next slide. So, ideally, another thing that's going to come out of these projects that we've been working on will be this Community Cats Needs Assessment Toolkit. So another way to give you a resource to be able to further understand the strengths and weaknesses of your community. If you've been struggling to do TNR and you're driving 2 hours to go to a clinic to get your cats spayed and neutered, and then there is no access to affordable spay and neuter care in your community, I love the work you're doing, but I also feel the challenges that you're feeling, because it's so much harder to be successful when it is, that picture of you alone, and it's you with your own shield there, the TNR shield, and there's no other shields there to help you. That's really, we want to acknowledge that that's happening in some communities, and we want to be able to figure out a way to address that. As a TNR organization, you may have to learn how to start a spay neuter clinic in your community, and that's where United Spay Alliance comes into place. So again, understanding your community cats needs in your area can help you explain to funders, why did this happen? What are the expectations? And when I say funders, I mean donors, I mean foundations, I mean your volunteers, anybody who are supporting you. You can communicate with them and say, hey, if we're the only game in town, we have these challenges. But if we have the support of a spay neuter clinic for owned cats, that then leverages you and helps you get to that more densely targeted spay neuter option, because some of those cats in that 68 cat box that John had, some of those might be quasi owned cats. They might not be trapped cats. They might be an indoor outdoor an unneutered male cat that's super friendly but goes outside because they don't want them in the house. And if they could get that cat spay neutered as an owned cat, there's another circle around that cat, but it's not a TNR effort. So it's impacting that geographic space. So again, important to know community cats needs assessment. That's something that we hope that's going to come forward, and I'm very eager to try and help you all be able to better understand what you have going on in the area and then be able to leverage out from there. Next slide. So so what we also at this want to try and encourage is, again, professionalizing community cat programming leadership. So I strongly believe with my heart and soul that it's time that we have, community cat management certification. We have community cat program managers in our larger organizations. We have community cat and trap, neuter, return, manage. We have the whole TNR language in our culture as individuals too. So we want to leverage our existing regional expertise. We want to support long-term leadership and partnerships. So we want to be able to collaborate with the biggest and go all the way down to the individuals and have the same common language with regards to community cats in our community, and the assistance that we all need to be able to support the care of these cats. Incorporate educational programming and certification. So lots of great ideas are floating around out there about how to continue to professionalize, pull forward, acknowledge, support the organizations that say a vet clinic has a holding space for cats in traps, and so we don't have to worry about holding the cats. They have the holding space. It's a little bit bigger than a closet. It's not a heavy lift, but then those veterinarians we would support, we would acknowledge, we would promote them, as a community cat clinic that they know what to do with regards to cats, and we would advocate for them and their services. So some of those kinds of ideas are what are floating around with us to be able to empower this community to be much stronger and more forward. This is the year of the cat, according to the veterinary community. So we're going to make it the year of the cat and the year of the community cat. So that's really important to me. Next slide. Again, I'm going to say collaboration, mentoring, mentee, coaching. We're going to have regional alignment. We're going to try and get folks to collaborate together, to meet each other together. So thinking strategically, looking forward, even though we are still living in this virtual Zoom room of the world. And apologies, this is GoToWebinar, but trying to figure out a way for us to make connections and make the connections when it's not an emergency situation. Let's make those connections early so we have the relationships developed, and then we're able to work together when we have challenges in the community. So collective impact and approach. And it's so much easier when we are doing this together. Next slide. So we also have a board of advisors that works on some of these ideas and suggestions. It's a group of folks from all around the country. We have researchers, we're representative from funders, municipal stakeholders. So we're trying to get a cohort of our own together to be able to help guide us through this process. And it's organic. It's not going to be anything that's going to be set in stone, because over time things will change and things are very different regionally. Some of our recommendations will be different for TNR in Canada versus TNR in Miami, Florida. So again, we want to allow for that elasticity and have some bedrock parts to it, but we want to also be able to make sure that it's flexible enough so that you're able to use your own tribal knowledge to be able to craft a program that makes sense and will drive more funding even to your own organization. Next slide. All right, so some of those things I've mentioned earlier that we're talking about potentially putting together in the future, more webinars like this. So you can give me a little thumbs up emoji if you like that idea of having more online training, certification, Information hubs. I mean, if you need to go in front of your city council and you want to talk about trap neuter return, where do you go? Do you just go to Mr. Google or Mrs. Google, or where do you go to get all your information to be able to justify the program that you want to present in that town? So these are some of the things, again, professionalizing community CAP program management. We want to support, we want to pull the work that you're doing out forward into the sunlight, and really celebrate the hard work that the community members are doing. And so these are just some of our ideas at this point in time. Next slide. Sorry, next slide, Bree. There we go. So we're going to showcase those case studies of the pilot projects. We're going to encourage peer replication and momentum. Big word. That is my dream. Big word. We want to build momentum for everybody that is out there, and we want to scale this up. And we want to have everyone really just believe that we can make change. We've had a lot of challenges. I acknowledge challenges, but I do believe with enough collaboration and support, positive energy, we can create the momentum to help cats all across the country and around the world. Next slide. All right, so that's the end of my part of the presentation, just giving you a heads up of what we think is coming up down the road. And at this point in time, I think we're going to try turning our cameras on, and we have just a bit of time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy, and thank you, John. I'm going to go ahead and leave my camera off because apparently my internet barely wants to cooperate. So I thank you, everyone, for tuning in with my slow slide advancements. But here we are. We made it to the end. This is a great time to drop your questions into the questions box. We have Stacy and John here for you. A couple quick questions that we got early on. Just about targeting. I wonder, John, if you could speak a little bit to targeting. And I've heard this a few times. And so is the goal when you're targeting to focus like just on females or just on the males, or is there a certain percentage that you want to reach of the area? Just very quickly, I know that there's a whole webinar, I'm sure, on targeting.
Right. Yeah, there is. In a perfect world, if you could only catch female cats, that would be the most efficient thing to do. But the reality is you're just as likely, I assume, to end up with a male cat in a trap as a female cat. And so there's some benefit to sterilizing male cats in terms of population control. And the general feeling is that if you've got one in the trap, why not get it sterilized? It's not nearly as time consuming for the veterinarian as a female. So yes, in theory, female cats are more valuable, but the reality sort of dictates that we sterilize males as we go along.
And I'm gonna just jump in and add, it really depends on the environment. So if you have a lot of complaints in your community of cats fighting, you're gonna want to get those male cats neutered, because if you just do the females, then the male cats, they're still gonna be fighting probably even more aggressively for the few unspayed females that are out there. And so you'll still have those community complaints. So there's different strategy. And again, also if you have a veterinarian that goes, you have to book a spay 6 weeks out, but I'll take neuters anytime because I can do them quickly, basically take what you can get. So it's sort of evaluating the environment that you have and how do you make that wonderful little mosaic of a community CAP program based on the resources you have available and what the footprint is like out there in terms of if you have a neighbor situation and they're complaining about fighting a lot, then I do think you have to go for those male cats.
And I would just add something that I get asked a lot, just a very brief moment of clarification. What I illustrated was a semi-idealized form of targeting. We know that in many cases, you're not, as a group, in a position to say, we'll accept cats from this area, but tough luck everybody else. So in that case, you can do partial targeting, and that's very worthwhile too. You can say, okay, I'm going to encourage or selectively service this targeted area, but I'm not going to completely turn off the provision of services to the rest of my service area. So the reality is that you might have to do an intermediate sort of strategy, but that's still more effective than just the completely opportunistic version.
All right, thank you for that conversation. I think it's important to have that distinction. I'm reading our questions here. I wonder, I'm just going to read it as is and let you guys respond. So one of the challenges with tracking is the cost of tools to collect data, where every dollar you get in fundraising, you can feel like it needs to be put towards the TNR itself or the supplies you need. So is there any scope within our plans to have low cost access to tools that can capture the data for us rather than having us all buy that program or platform individually?
There are various things in the works at different levels of development that may help automate the process to some extent. But what I would always caution is that you would not attempt to run an animal shelter and X out the dollar line to pay your accountant because you'd rather spend that money promoting adoptions. There's just certain levels of accountability that are important, an important part of doing business professionally, like Stacy said. And in my mind, spending, let's just say for the sake of argument, 5% of your community cat budget on gathering and evaluating data pays off far more over time than had you spent that 5% to do a few more surgeries. So, I think that's an important case to make. Yes, collecting data is oftentimes something that gets kind of set aside because it doesn't seem like the most immediate concern, but just consider the cost of doing a whole project and not actually knowing for sure or being able to learn from what you either achieved or did not achieve in that target population beyond just the simple number of surgeries that you did. So I make a case for putting some investment into that. I think it's critical and I think it pays off. And it absolutely does not need to be a large portion of a management budget, but there needs to be something there that makes it an intrinsic and important part of the project rather than just an afterthought.
Yeah, and I would just, make the most important thing is making sure you get a sense upfront of what you're looking for. What are the categories that you want to make sure you track? And, what gets measured gets managed, I guess they say. So, but so you want to make sure you're prepared to manage it if you're getting this information. So get a list together of all the key points, location. Do you want all the veterinary for the cats, all that kind of stuff? So what is it that you want to capture? And then look for information there, because I think some of the software that's out there is evolving to kind of be adaptive to the needs of the community cat world. But there are also organizations I know out there that have somebody who's like super savvy with Airtable, Google Sheets, or whatever, and they do use the Google Maps and do all the pins and that kind of thing to be able with different colors. I know some organizations who've got the Google Maps for 10 years of all their colonies with the different colors on the pins of the status of the cats and everything like that. So I guess it's looking for identifying what it is you specifically need, and do you need an expensive tool for that, or is it more for like basic tracking purposes, and then sort of build from there. And a lot of apps are coming out too, sort of with that basic tracking component, also with the AI photos and all that.
Yeah. And please, I'm happy to answer questions at that email address because can be a complicated topic. So feel free to pose any more specific questions to me, and I will be happy to get to those as soon as I can about tracking, counting, etc.
And important the puzzle to know what we're working with out there. I have a question for you, Stacy. I think they're asking about the Community Cat Program Management course, and they're asking, is this something that you can complete if you work full time?
Yes, for sure. So it's an 8-week course, and it starts on September. I think it's the 15th, that Monday, September 15th, and it's going to be it's all, what do you call it, asynchronous, right? So you can take the class, you do the homework. There's one Q&A session that's live around at 11 a.m. on Fridays. But if you can't attend it because you're working full time, that's okay. There's an alternative exercise you can do in order to get credit for that class. So it can be done totally on your time. And the work ranges between 2 to 5 hours per week. And it's a pass fail course. So, but a lot of conversation, there's a lot of discussion. We just really want you to start thinking strategically and holistically about your organization and where you want to take it over the next 3 to 5 years.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the top of the hour. I do want to mention I see some questions that are very like in the weeds of TNR and like the ins and outs of how we can more effectively trap our colonies. And so I do want to shout out again, Community Cats Podcast has some excellent resources on trapping. They have the free webinars for some tips and tricks. They have monthly TNR certification workshops by neighborhood cats as well. So tons of expert advice out there that will dig into any of these weeds that you would like to dig into. So please do check them out. That's communitycatspodcast.com for those questions. But anyway, I would like to wrap things up and thank you again, John. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you to the Summerlee Foundation for digging into this and giving us some very important things to think about as we consider where we want to go with our community cat programs and how we make the most impact possible for those kitties. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Again, our recording, this has been recorded and will be available to you in a follow-up email. We will have this available on our website and our YouTube channel by next week, August 5th. So that's your magic date. So thanks so much. I hope everyone has an awesome day.
Thank you.
Thank you.